Lisa, I start?
Sure, Ron. Thank you.
Okay, so do I just briefly introduce you for your synthesis?
No, you briefly introduced the session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the synthesis session. This comes after we have had a series of actually 10 webinars from quite a diverse group of social enterprises sharing both about themselves, but more importantly about the impact of COVID and the whole range of responses that they have had, including discussions around how the pandemic has both opened up opportunities, but also posed new challenges on social enterprises. And of course, on our continued goal of essentially accelerating the impact of social enterprises on the social development goals. In a sense, the pandemic has been a setback, and I guess a lot of the focus has now been on first looking back and survival and recovery, and then acceleration. So this afternoon, Lisa will provide us with her synthesis, essentially, of perhaps common themes, etc., of what has been shared across the 10 webinars by a diverse range of social enterprises and across also a geographical range. And then we will open it up to 12, right? We will have 12 people who will both react to the synthesis and continue to provide inputs. The main purpose of the synthesis and the following discussions is to continue to brainstorm and get inputs on how we can really further enrich, refine, rescope our agenda for the regional conference coming in September, particularly on the platforms and how the discussion should proceed. Yeah. So I guess with that, I will, if you don't mind, and with due respect to Lisa, we all know Lisa very well already. So if you don't mind, I will skip the formal introductions and turn over the floor now to Lisa. Okay. And before that, first again, welcome everyone. This is a small family of familiar names and faces and organizations. So again, everyone welcome, and we look forward to a very productive time of exchange and brainstorming. Okay, Lisa, your turn.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ron, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm especially thankful that the principals as well as the moderators and speakers from the past 10 webinars are actually with us this afternoon. And I wouldn't mention each of you because if I do, I think I will spend so much time. But welcome to the webinar synthesis session. And I have chosen to provide an input that I have actually titled Shaping Relevant and Responsive Multi-Country Platforms to Assist Social Enterprise Recovery Towards Building Back Better, Insights from the COVID-19 Serve webinar series. Of course, at first I was tempted to actually make a book out of the very rich presentations that have been given during the webinar series, and present the various models as well as the lessons that can be learned from the models and experiences presented. But actually, the task of synthesizing the webinars for this afternoon, as Ron has been pointing out, is really towards getting some insights so that we could actually shape the multi-country platforms intended to assist social enterprises and the poor they serve to recover and to build back better given COVID-19. So I'd like to present to you this actually a set of insights and some discussion points that I hope could serve as starting points for the discussion together with all the participating organizations in the webinar series who are here this afternoon, who are actually going to be sharing the session as presenters and speakers, no? Because we have asked them to make short presentations as well in response to the synthesis as well as additional points that they have called from their particular webinars. So next slide, please. I shall be giving an overview and providing a context of the webinars. In terms of objectives, themes, and featured organizations. And then before I go to the insights and discussion points, vis-a-vis the webinar objectives. So next slide, please. In terms of the webinar series, there were actually two objectives, no? That we had. The first was to share, network, and collaborate so that we could actually appreciate the impact as well as the responses to COVID-19 of social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions of the sector across Asia towards developing a responsive recovery agenda for the social enterprise sector. No? And the second objective of the webinar series was to contribute to evaluating and reshaping the regional social entrepreneurship SDG acceleration platforms, what we called SESDG acceleration platforms that we were supposed to launch in March with UNSCAP, but was postponed to September for our SEAL conference in September. And this is given the changed context of COVID-19. So let's keep in mind that these are the two objectives that I will be using as looking glass for drawing some insights and discussion points for the synthesis. So next slide, please. In terms of additional points regarding the context, no, of the webinar series and the webinars, as well as the insights that we are and discussion points I'll be sharing, there were already adjustments that have been made on the social entrepreneurship SDG acceleration platforms by the ISEA Regional Council, many of whom are represented here actually, on July 9, 2020, when the Regional Council of the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia discussed the impact of the pandemic and how we were going to define acceleration platform or the SESDG acceleration platform so that they can be more responsive given the impact of COVID-19. And in that regional council meeting, ISEA already integrated the recovery of social enterprises towards building back better as a focus of each of the social entrepreneurship SDG acceleration platforms. So unlike before, where social enterprises were seen as, promoters of cross-sectoral collaboration to accelerate the SDGs. In the adjustment made last July 9, we integrated the recovery of social enterprises towards building back better as a focus, as a prerequisite to actually contributing to accelerating the SDG platforms, that us accelerating the SDGs, no, which the platforms were all about before COVID-19. So the 5 evolving platforms, just to give just to remind everyone, our Health for All, Sustainable Livelihoods and Women's Economic Empowerment in Agricultural Value Chains, or sometimes also described or referred to as the platform promoting the benchmarks for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains. A platform on decent work and sustainable consumption and production, which actually combined these two. In the earlier discussion, in March, these 2 platforms were supposed to be separate, but they have been integrated during the July 9 Regional Council meeting. And then we have a platform on rural revitalization, youth, and social entrepreneurship. And then another platform that's emerging is technological innovations for sustainable development, or this has been what has become of the urban regeneration and social entrepreneurship platform that's actually being led by social enterprises in the more developed market economies. So these are the 5 evolving platforms that we are actually reshaping and evaluating in terms of becoming, as to ensure that they're relevant to the recovery of social enterprises, as well as the need, for building back better towards accelerating the SDGs. So in terms of the platform objectives, there are actually 4 that have been defined. One is for the platform, for all these platforms to be platforms for learning exchange. Second is that they will be platforms for projecting collective impact on the recovery of social enterprises and marginalized sectors served. Third is that they will be platforms to develop and advocate changes in government policy and programs for social enterprise recovery and as partners for building back better. And fourthly, these platforms are to generate support from the private sector, private donors, financial institutions, national and international government bodies to broaden the impact and practice of social entrepreneurship and cross-sectoral collaboration. So this is the context within which this webinar series synthesis discussion is also being discussed. Next slide, please. So in terms of webinar themes and featured organizations, we first had WFPO do Fair Trade COVID-19 response in Asia. And then we had Dompet Duafa and their response and contribution to the Indonesian health sector amid COVID. And then CICIP and their webinar on turning the COVID-19 threat into an opportunity, where they share their experience as a social incubator of social enterprises. And then there was Trubus Binasubadaya, who had a webinar on rice and living in harmony with COVID-19. And then a webinar with Human Nature, or Gandang Kalikasan, where they discussed engaging human nature stakeholders during COVID-19. And then on June 30, PRM's webinar was featured, where it talked about Seed to Table. It was a conversation on food security, sustainable agriculture, and social entrepreneurship towards sustainability and resilience. And then came the Change Fusion's 5 social enterprises versus COVID-19, from survival to regeneration. And then finding the light during COVID-19, shared by a cluster of social enterprises that were initiated by Howard Ling, a serial social entrepreneur in Hong Kong. And then we had Alter Trade Foundation presenting their sustaining people's development under the new normal. And lastly, but not the least, we had the building social connections and resilience during lockdown in China by the group of initiated by Rural Reconstruction China. And their so this is now the synthesis session that we are going to have. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to present to you 3 insights and 2 discussion points, just so we can have the discussion going. And as I said, these insights and discussion points are directly related to the objectives of the webinar and the platforms. So the first insight that I'd like to share is that the webinars validated the value of multi-country learning platforms that featured models and initiatives of social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions and networks in responding to the pandemic and building back better. So each model or initiative featured was an inspirational story demonstrating various roles of social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions in responding to the pandemic in ways that, first, they promoted social enterprise values of social equity, sustainability, and solidarity. in protecting and catering to the unmet needs of the marginalized and most vulnerable sectors and communities. Second, they provided access to health services, masks and personal protective gears, healthy food, livelihood, agricultural services, information, education, and other basic needs and services of marginalized sectors and communities, as well as the social entrepreneurs and frontliners who serve them. Because some of the social enterprise resource institutions, of course, are catering to social entrepreneurs, and many of the social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions also catered to the needs of the health workers. And then thirdly, they pursued social innovation and creatively utilized ICT and social media to become more responsive and or to enhance their outreach. And then they mobilized stakeholders and community assets, networks, and cadres, enriching or catering to the most marginalized and vulnerable. And then in one case, it even showed disruption and showed the potential for disrupting markets for the common good. No? That was a case from Hong Kong. Next slide, please. So on the first insight, what we're just trying to point out is that as a learning platform, there is a need for these regional platforms, even only as learning platforms. But a second insight regarding multi-country learning platforms is now about this insight. No? Multi-country learning platforms need to support or draw from local initiatives and expertise, which was actually shown by the participating organizations in the webinars, to build new and enhanced capabilities among social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions and networks to respond to a changed reality, to recover and to build back better. So in relation to this insight, we note that responding to a changed reality, recovering and building back better has many expressions or dimensions, depending on the nature of the social enterprise products and services and the economic subsectors where the social enterprises are situated. For example, it's very different with those from crafts, or with those involved in food, with those involved in health, versus those involved in ecotourism or agriculture and microfinance. So the differentiated impacts actually across these subsectors and the nature of the products and services create differing realities and differing agenda for recovering and building back better. And depending on the societal context, stakeholders and markets served, it also has a very specific set of dimensions. No? The change reality, the recovery, and the building back better has a different expression or dimension. And so between the context of a developing economy versus a developed market economy, urban versus rural, accessible or hard to reach in relation to ICT and other infrastructure versus those that are more easily reached or that are accessible, that have access to these, and then whether they're in local, national, or global markets. So, so these differing dimensions and expressions respond to a changed reality, recover, and build back better shows the complexity, you know, of what responding to the changed reality, recovery, and building back better really means. So, and responding to a recovering and building back better entails enhanced capabilities, therefore, in managing these complex realities. And I've just synthesized it into capabilities in strategic management, whether they're in operations, marketing, human resources, and organizational development, finance, and then or stakeholder management. These are the functional areas usually of management, but they also entail enhanced capabilities in managing change, managing crisis, managing social innovation, and managing digital transformation. So all in all, there's actually a need to build a critical mass of social entrepreneurs and leaders of social enterprise resource institutions with these new or enhanced capabilities to adapt, transition, diversify, shift, pivot, build new initiatives, and all these other responses given the opportunities and threats faced. So what a learning platform means, therefore, is not just sharing of experiences and models, but it's really needing to invest in building new and enhanced capabilities among social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions in these areas. And in doing so, we need to harness the expertise, no, of the more advanced social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions that were actually the participants in this webinar series. So insight number 3, next slide please, has to do with multi-country collaboration, projecting collective impact. No? Because if you remember, as I mentioned, the first objective of the platforms is for them to be learning platforms. The second objective is for them to actually collaborate to project collective impact, no, of social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions in these platforms. So one major insight is that multi-country collaboration to project collective impact of these platforms relevant to the recovery of social enterprises and the marginalized sectors they serve entails evolving or developing a system with responsive tools and local capacities to measure impact and the progress in achieving them. So I'm emphasizing this because actually, even before the pandemic, measuring social enterprise impact has already been identified as a weakness of the social enterprise sector across Asia. And there are a number of social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions, some of them featured in the webinars, that have developed these systems. But for most social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions, especially the smaller ones, these tools for measuring impact and measuring progress to achieve them have not been put in place. No? And in this context, a commitment, there's a need for a commitment of participating social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions to do such. No? So if we are to have if we are to project collective impact, we will need to be more disciplined in measuring our impact and collectively projecting them. So next slide, please. The next slide is really a discussion point, no? Because this is on partnership building and resource mobilization from private donors, financial institutions, national, international intergovernmental bodies to support the recovery of social enterprises. This is one of the objectives of the platforms. No? This is one of the reasons why the platforms are being set up. Actually, a social enterprise recovery or stimulus fund has been suggested and discussed in at least 2 of the webinars, no? Particularly the webinar with WFTO Asia and the webinar with CICIP. A startup fund has been set up by WFTO Asia, and a new fund facility has been set up by CICIP. A number of the featured organizations actually have existing funds providing hybrid financing to social enterprises. No? I'm mentioning here Dompet Duafa and Change Fusion. No? They provide both grants or capacity building support as well as enterprise financing to partner social enterprises. So the question that I'd like to pose to you as a discussion point for this webinar synthesis discussion is, does a social enterprise recovery fund at the regional level, for example, initiated by ISEA together with all the platform conveners that is cross-cutting across all the platforms, does it make sense? And if so, how could it be shaped so it is supportive to existing initiatives? So that's the 4th discussion point. And then The fifth one is also a discussion point on changing and reforming government policies and programs to support the recovery of social enterprises and the marginalized sectors served, and as partners for building back better. So among the organizations featured, engagement with government during the pandemic was active in 3 countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. But it's only in the Philippines where there's a comprehensive advocacy for the enactment of a poverty reduction through social entrepreneurship bill, what is being pursued. In both Indonesia and Vietnam, the engagement with government is really to provide inputs for program development and provide inputs to collaborating for engaging social enterprises in these programs. But I might have misread it, no? So maybe our Indonesian and Vietnamese colleagues from CICIP, Dompet Duafa, and Binaswadaya can actually provide some additional insights, no, on this. Engagement with government was not evident in Thailand, but I remember that one of the researchers who actually made the presentation on social innovation raised the question, where is government as an enabler for social innovation? Because he noted that it was absent, and he did mention that they are an important actor that should be enabling social innovation, but they were nowhere to be seen in the 100 social innovations that they actually reviewed that developed during the pandemic. In China, there was a big role of government that was noted in the management of the pandemic and in providing a regulatory environment. So, so the discussion point has to do with changing and reforming government policies and programs to support the recovery of social enterprises and the marginalized sectors served, and as partners for building back better, needs to be discussed more and better nuanced given the differing country contexts and the level of development of the social enterprise sector, as well as the orientation and capacities of the social enterprise stakeholders. So for some countries, the social enterprise sector is highly developed, and that is so in the Philippines, so that you see that there is a comprehensive advocacy for the poverty reduction through social entrepreneurship bill. But in other countries, such is not the case, even as the level of development of the social enterprise sector is also high, like in Indonesia and Vietnam. Such comprehensive engagement with government regarding the role of social enterprises as partners in poverty reduction or the sustainable development goals embedded in policy is not actually being pursued. But in relation to programs, I think they are being pursued. You know? So, but one of the things that we've found to be important in relation to engaging government is an emerging practical issue. So, and we are actually encountering this practical issue as we are discussing with potential multilateral agencies, as well as potential government agencies regarding supporting social enterprises for building back, for recovery, and building back better in terms of stimulus packages. The practical issue is, how would platforms qualify social enterprises that would receive funds or stimulus packages from government and the private sector that are intended to support social enterprise recovery in a situation where they don't have any legal status in most countries in Asia? So that's actually a practical question we're grappling with. And there may be some practical ways forward to this, and we can discuss this in this webinar. The last question that I would like to pose, and just to complete this presentation for this webinar discussion, is how should the themes and elements of the 5 platforms be developed, adjusted, or further adjusted, given the most important themes and outcomes that have been emphasized as critical by the webinars? For example, food security, resilience, and health were very much emphasized. No? And even as we go beyond the webinars, given the important themes and outcomes, that have been brought to the fore by the pandemic. So that's the final question I would like to pose, and I'd like to end there and leave these questions as well as the insights and the questions as actually discussion points that could help enrich our shaping of the platforms. No? As you know, the platforms are going to be convening this August by the lead organizations. No? The lead organizations will be convening to discuss the platforms, the shape of the platforms. And a discussion also will be happening on August 11 regarding the platform's objectives and the platform's nature, you know, overall. So whatever we actually discuss in this webinar synthesis will be inputted to that discussion on August 11. So thank you very much, Ron. Back to you.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Lisa, just to recap, so you're and just correct me if I not got it correct, but you essentially just to recap for everyone, the 5 general insights that you shared. The first one in gist is that the webinars themselves justify or demonstrate the value of a sharing platform of learning from each other.
Yeah,
yes.
As learning platforms, yeah.
Yes. And then the second one is from the whole range of experiences, we see how it demonstrates, well, the responses themselves demonstrate a whole range of leadership managerial capabilities that need to be strengthened and developed, right? Particularly in the context of responding to change. And following the usual, these can be categorized. So we categorize it in strategy and then the sub-functional areas of marketing, operations, finance as categories for classifying where the areas of responses both to the pandemic and to build back better. And so therefore you need perhaps implications for continuing learning in more detail and capacity building for the SEs along these areas. The third is the whole question and challenge of showing collective impact, right? I mean, as a group, as a network, as a sector, yes, we've done all of this, but how do you measure, monitor, essentially, and communicate, right? The scale, the type, the level of impact that the network is currently able or not able to achieve. The fourth is the need for continuing resources and investments, right? Across the first 3 and even the last one, which is really your fifth point was for the responses to build back better, to recover, to accelerate impact, inevitably advocacy of changes in government policies and programs will probably be needed. But again, it varies. Okay? And of course, all of these are happening in a whole range of different contexts. So there has to be adjustments. And so, but those are your 5, right? So this is just sort of summarizing the 5 insights. Okay. So,
but on the fourth run,
yes.
run, I'd like to emphasize that there's actually a specific suggestion on setting up a social enterprise recovery fund, you know, at the regional level. Yeah. So I think in that context, it needs because there are supposed to be 5 platforms, and that suggestion is for a social enterprise recovery fund at the regional level, cutting across all platforms to actually be set up. Yeah.
Okay.
And and how it should be shaped so it is supportive to existing initiatives is actually a point for discussion.
Okay. So then if I were to rephrase the 5 points, they can also be posed, not just insights, but questions about going forward. So one is for everyone, how do we continue to build up the value of learning and sharing? Second, how do we build and identify, how do we identify and build the capacities needed to be able to respond, the SE capacities able to respond better. Third, how do we continue to build on showing collective impact? Fourth, as you put it, with a specific recommendation of the fund, how do we continue to push that forward? And fifth, again, on the area of policies and programs, how do we move forward in terms of advocating, influencing? So, okay, yeah, if you phrase it that way. So now I will turn over as programmed. Gomer will cue, and what we will do is to hear responses, reactions, additional inputs to Lisa's 5 insights, and essentially also questions on how to move forward. I will turn over to Gomer to cue, but we will basically follow the sequence of the webinar series. Yeah, okay. So Gomer, who comes first?
Jerome of
Okay,
WFDA.
Jerome.
Hi, Prof. Rod. Yeah,
Hi.
I guess I'll be first again. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So just to share some additional insights and perhaps to try to answer some of the questions that Lisa has posted on the group chat for us. First, again, this COVID-19 is an infectious disease that has turned into a disaster, not just health-wise, but economic, social, and even political. So it puts at risk all the investments, all the hard work, all the fruits that we have nurtured all these years in building social enterprises, fair trade enterprises. So we cannot just sit down and let all this hard work and all the benefits that the poor and marginalized are enjoying. We have to do something to manage the risk and ensure that there will be recovery. And in fact, if there are, Lanyi, if I may borrow a famous Chinese line, no? In every crisis, there's always an opportunity. So perhaps this is our chance to, as Lisa has continuously mentioned earlier, build back better. But where do we start? Okay, so just a while ago, just before we started, a small group of women, a small enterprise of women in Bicol region, hardly affected severely by COVID-19, has messaged me asking where can they get funds because they are in the process of revitalizing their women enterprises. And if Dodo is here, I said, well, maybe we can refer you to FSSI. So, but on the larger context, we will again harp at our line. No? We need to come up with a mechanism that we can use to stimulate or recover our fair trade enterprises and our social enterprises across the region. It is important for our fair trade enterprises, our social enterprises, to ensure their future, their survival during and even beyond the pandemic. We need to help them pivot their enterprises. The world has changed, the the market has changed. We need to help them change, pivot their enterprises. Um, and again, there is a need for the stimulus fund or the recovery fund that can help. Like for example, in our area of work assigned to us, no, or for the decent work, sustainable production, consumption, which we will soon relaunch as decent work for all in sustainable value chains. To help not just recover, but hopefully to even accelerate, we need to set up the stimulus funds for fair trade enterprises and social enterprises that are working to ensure that decent work for all happens. And if they're already experiencing decent work through fair trade enterprises and through social enterprises, we need to safeguard all these gains. Where do we begin to set up this stimulus fund, this recovery funds? we can set it up in our own backyards. WFTO Asia, together with our members, we have agreed that enterprises that will be developed along the lines of COVID-19 response, there will be a certain percentage that will be channeled to our recovery fund for fair trade enterprises. So perhaps building on lessons learned from our experience, maybe we can expand that to a wider coverage to cover a social enterprise stimulus and recovery fund. Where else can we get funding for this? State financing. We hear a lot of governments announcing stimulus packages soon, or they have already started to provide, but they're providing this mostly to large businesses. Why not lobby for budget allocation for social enterprise recovery and stimulus funds from the state coffers? If it takes a law, then perhaps we should do advocacy and lobbying for these laws to be enacted. Second, maybe we can look into private funds, private foundations, donors, and even corporate social responsibility funds. Maybe they are looking for worthwhile investments during the time of COVID. We are that worthwhile investment. And lastly, inspired by Lisa's interest in going after some of the richest millionaires and billionaires of the world, maybe, there are enough riches out there, but the funds are not in our pockets. It's in other people's pockets. So maybe it's time to reach out to them to help, to give them an opportunity to help the poor and marginalized through social enterprise and fair trade enterprise recovery and stimulus. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. So we proceed first to our next responder or reactor. I think we have Haryo from Dompet Tuafa. Hello,
Yeah.
Haryo, welcome.
Hi, Ron. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Good afternoon. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak in the front of you all. And I think that in Indonesia context, like the Indonesian government, we have no, like the government doesn't, discriminate like the SE or general corporation. So they see SE as, general corporation. So, and the government stimulus package is only like hold the interest of the companies from the bank. And I think that, and some tax incentive for, that company that provide some food or other things that needed by the community. But, I think that the Indonesian government stimulus package is not, is not quite good for the social enterprise itself. And I think that regarding to the questions, I think that I agree with Jeremy about the hybrid financing is very important for us because, most of the social enterprise is, as you call as social enterprise with poor people as primary stakeholders. And I think that if we work with poor people as primary stakeholders, I think we can, doing the hybrid finance. And I think by doing the hybrid finance, we can access, some of philanthropic funds. As Jerome said that, maybe we can ask for like grant makers or grant making organizations, such as maybe private foundations, billionaire, or maybe like individual donors, because we are working with, with community or with farmers, with small traders. And I think that if we can access some of philanthropic funds to as a working capital instead of waiting for the government to help us, and give, the government funds to support our social enterprise. And I think it is better if we do like the hybrid financing, so we can approach, some of grant makers, and use the philanthropic funds to, uh, to build back better. I think we can use the fund to, for our suppliers. We can use the funds to, to buy some of the our community enterprise or our small producers products. And I think that we can use the philanthropic funds. I think that the hybrid finance is, our priority in building back better. I think that's some of my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Emilia, you next from Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emilia from Bina Swadaya. And as Mas Haryo from Dompet Duafa mentioned, that because Bina Swadaya working with poor people, with community, in Indonesia we don't have any we still what that even we don't have a legal status, it's okay to get funding during the COVID-19, because we can do like now Bina Swadaya working with GKMC is a Catholic networking services that we give food security and also food self-sufficient program around in Indonesia. They don't have a legal status, and we working together to do training to give the poor community grow kit and agriculture kit for the self-food sufficient, because actually Bina Swadaya is still afraid if we work with government, because still in COVID-19 it's many program from government in kind cash or something a program, but because we think that they don't have what means the rule from the government to involve our no. I think that government will give us the program, but they still don't have the fixed rules. So we try to do ourselves as organization. We collect from donor, we collect from institution, we collect from philanthropic organization, also the private company, to do something to do something good for the queer community. Like in Jakarta, we work with Medco Foundation and also Medco Energy to help poor people in Jakarta, also in Lampung, like with Catholic networking services. I think that's something like that, Mr. Ronald.
Sir Ron, you're on mute.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Emilia. So I guess in your case, there's still a little bit major concern about collaborating with government because of the uncertainty, and also, well, but ultimately how to better work with other networks to improve the impact of, to improve minimizing the impact of the pandemic on the poor communities. Yeah, thank you. So next, Marlon of PRM.
Uh, Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Gomer and Lisa. I think I was given 3 minutes, but let me first reflect on the ISEA COVID-19 Serve webinar series. And we believe that the webinar series provided us weekly educational, motivational, and inspirational sharing sessions from ISEA's members and partners from all over Asia. All of us, I believe, imparted and listened to how we dealt with the pandemic, how big and small organizations in different countries in the region responded, adapted, and even thrived amid COVID-19. I think that's basically the challenge, no? Within the pandemic, the idea for social enterprises really is to float, survive, hopefully adapt, uh, thrive, and recover. And how can that be done? I think we will be needing sort of a blended capital. And I think in the Philippine context, we should be pushing really for the adoption of the present bill, where a recovery fund in the latest discussion of the coalition we included. No, so I think that's a basic one. Ours were responses that targeted the poor and vulnerable, that were delivered in time, and that used and innovated what basic things we in our local communities had. And I think those were demonstrated during the sharing sessions. And from this experience, we see that it will be best to know who are the social enterprises in our midst and how together in solidarity help each other from all over Asia, from all over the membership of ISAIA. We see that online exchanges are possible for everyone, and we should keep in mind how remote communities and groups can have different forms of access to internet connectivity. And from these experiences, we see that it will be best for us to, well, as I already mentioned earlier, adapt and risk-proof our business plans, social enterprise plans, so that we will be able to, as I said, adapt, well, revive, and build back stronger and better. And as always, care for our people, our staff, our partner suppliers, small producers, and frontline workers, and our consumers in good and bad times. Food will always be essential, and our social enterprises and our stakeholder communities should contribute to the security of food, because it's a global challenge everywhere. Uh, Nutrition, livelihoods, and the earth's natural resources. I also mentioned earlier, we believe that blended capital is needed, that one can come from government, the private sector, the social sector, granting institutions. Such mix of type of funding we would really need to, as I said earlier, float, recover, adapt, thrive, and yeah, hopefully address the pandemic that way alongside with our communities. Many already have mentioned, and well, Professor Ron, Jerome, Hario, engaging those that provide funds will be necessary at this point. As I also mentioned, we still have some time left to really push for the enaction of the enactment of the present bill. And the present bill is something that we can, I think, rely in the future. But during the time that we push for this bill, I think we can start engaging, we can start leveraging, we can start helping each other in solidarity of social enterprise organizations. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Ron. Back to you, Ron.
Thank you, Marlon. And so, is Earl back, Kumer?
Not yet, sir. We'll call on Ham of CICIP.
Okay. Please, Ham
Yes,
of
good afternoon,
CSIP.
everyone. My name is Hang, and I am the program manager of CICIP. And actually, Ms. Wang, the director of CICIP, should be here today, but unfortunately, she is in another meeting. So I would like to be on behalf of her and CICIP to say thank you to you all and just share with you some insight from our own organization and also from Vietnam. I think the platform and all the insight, presented in the slide is really inspiring. And, for the whole, the sharing of the initiatives really indicate the unity in the reasons. And from CICIP, we feel very, very happy to be part of your series. After the first sharing with you about what CICIPs have done to respond towards COVID, Vietnam is now unfortunately fall in the second waves of COVID again, with more than 100 cases. So we do think that what we acted in the past really be helpful, because we indicated the social enterprises and other partners as always with us. Even now, we are falling in the second wave. So in terms of the insight today, I think we really need, the tools to measure, the impact of COVID, because it's sound to be a long-term, impact rather than the short-term. Since the last time we shared with each other, and now we need to have a more forums like this, to discuss over, when COVID come back. And in terms of the questions that you put on the last slide, I would like to share just a little bit about Vietnam, that the government is responding, by giving about a budget of $2.5 billion dollars to give a kind of stimulate package and also supporting package to, all like enterprises people. And we are keep following, the implementation of policy, and we found that from the government side, they have some difficulties and challenges in disbursing the fund to enterprises. So according to the latest news, the enterprises haven't, accessed the fund yet. And we know for sure that from the enterprises side, they also share about the uncertainty that they are facing in terms of what kind of investment in front of them. And if they get the cash or the funding, they have to pay the interest, and they also have to think further on, like the new investment. They have to think beyond, like a COVID time. So by, being with them during the COVID time and until now, we really, be consistent to be with the enterprises and the capacity building agent. We just keep encouraging the enterprises, making investment on knowledge, on reforming their organization, on their structure, or on market survey to understand better, where their products will go, especially when, everything's closed down. And for those who have a potential like a SME who can export, their goods, abroad. And for those who's at very grassroots level, they are very small, they are the ethnic minority groups. They also have a lot of concern about where they go, especially though who we are working with in tourism and agriculture sector. So to answer the last question, I just be back to the last question. In terms of our government, I think they have a goodwill for that. So CCIP just play the role of keeping on eye, networking with the other organization to find out why, you know, like the stimulate package providing funding to SME and social enterprises still there and cannot work. So we can, you know, like initiate some kind of policy dialogue with the government to get the fund through. We hope for the, you know, the next plan, I do think that because CCIP playing the role of capacity building agents, so we keep, you know, following, I mean, revising all the plans and the projects that we are very lucky to have the funding for now to revise the plan accordingly to the needs of the social enterprises. And in terms of joining the regional platform, I do think if Ms. Wang here today, she would be agree with me that we should join hands together in by many means to think further about like some kind of, how to say, initiative approach, like a CCIP is thinking about like a technology based or some other kind of interacting with each other, mobilizing some more knowledge and mobilizing some more tools to learn more about the impact and to address well to, you know, like the very near future when we end COVID or even when we are in COVID again. So in short, we would like to share with you about one important thing, that CCIP is leading in, you know, switching from working offline to online by using a kind of software. The name of that is BASE, B-A-S-E. It is a Vietnamese IT company. So it is assisting CCIP a lot in, you know, managing the program, the organization. So by doing it, we are leading in our role, and we also encourage the social enterprises to use the IT-based management and also to interact with us even more. So this is all the insight I have for today, and I thank you again for listening and also for joining together in this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ang. So, Lan Ying, you're next.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Professor Ronald. I'm very happy to see all my teacher before and AIM, and also thanks for Lisa and Asia. We are the last one to join this 10 webinars. So the previous sharings probably I'm not get so much and join. I was not able to join, but I think from China's experience, one of the key we filled facing the COVID-19 is the social participation and social mobilization, resource mobilization through the internet, which is very, very important. And it's very helpful. So the government was able to mobilize the IT technology to do all the monitoring, tracking, controlling the epidemic spreading, but the social organizations and NGOs could also taking this advantage of the internet IT technology to do quite a substantial resources mobilization during the Wuhan pandemic outbreak, and also later on to mitigate all the linking all the needs from the social groups. So one of the words is very popular among us now is called it's a combination of globalization and localization. We call it global localization. It's really well done in that way. For example, the one of the young student who studied computer science. He took an initiative during the Wuhan pandemic and set up a platform could mobilize a lot of people, both inside of China and outside of China, and to support Wuhan with all the resources needed, mobilize a lot of volunteers to respond the needed people, like people who need the transportation, and the restaurant who can deliver the food to the hospital, etc. So I think one of the key lessons learned is really social enterprise could play a critical role if they focus on the localization, but getting the global linkage to support. So this is in the urban setting with a kind of pandemic, but also in the agriculture sector, I think it's also necessary to localize to become a self-reliant. So the farmer cooperatives and agribusiness could play a role to really focus on the local needs. And with that, you could achieve a sustainability in the long run. And second point, I think also draw a kind of famous saying in China is talking about if you want to be successful in business, is to help others to do better in the business so you could succeed. One of the good example is Ma Yun's Alibaba. So what he saw 10 years ago, all the small enterprise, lack of financing support, and also uh, kind of a platform. So he set up the internet, Alibaba, support all this small business to do the borrowing, transaction, all the things. But with that platform, he succeed, attract a lot of small business. But a lot of small business also get very successful in getting the necessary to pursue their business. So to support the small enterprise, learning from the Chinese experience. And one of the issues, I don't know, because I was not, I'm not involved so many social enterprises, more on the social organizations development. So self-reliance is very important. Well, you can get the government policy provide some reduction of tax and delay of payment, but how to become a self-reliance in the business model is also very critical. So as I said, global localization is a kind of way for social enterprise and social organizations in China. We see is very useful and helpful in pursuing the sustainability and help the poor and marginal people in the local rural areas. So I think that's my point. So internet, the internet provide a very good platform for equal participation, equal access to information. So we see the powerfulness of in China, all type of platform through the internet that people can participate, can mobilize resources, and also can support each other in pursuing the responding the difficulties or needs during the pandemic and also for the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Lan Ying.
That's all what my sharing. You're welcome. Thanks.
So Gomer, who goes next? Is Earl or still coming on board, or we are done?
We're done with the speakers list, Sir Ron.
Okay.
Maybe to solicit from the other participants who are in the call now.
Okay, so now we open the floor up. As Gomer has suggested, please click on raise your hand, right? And feel free to chime in, ask your questions, or even share your reactions. So may I encourage the rest of us to share your reactions, insights, thoughts, ideas. Or if you like, you can also type it in the chat. Anyone? Or you can just speak up, actually. Unmute and then just speak up.
Thea Soriano of ASBE, would you want to read your comment or your input?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gomer, and thank you, Lisa and Isaiah, for the webinars. Although I'm not present in all of the webinars, but I managed to participate in a few of them. So one of the things that, as I mentioned in the chat, is one of the things that we need to do is to analyze the stimulus package of governments. And if you look at the Philippines, in fact, I have a slide on this, but I'm not able to put it up. But in the Philippines, we have started looking at the stimulus package mainly to understand it and to see if education for social enterprises is in this stimulus package. But what we noted was that in the Philippines, the stimulus package is focused more on subsidizing the private sector. So for example, in the chat box, I placed there that the Philippine Airlines, which is the premier airlines in the Philippines, the carrier in the Philippines, is already asking the government a subsidy of $170 million per month, and this is per month, to cover its losses and so that it is able to recover. Now, if you compare that to the proposed funds for child workers' families, which is only $12 million a year, so you can see that the slant of the stimulus package of the government is more for private sector. And if we go by this plan, this means that majority of the stimulus package will benefit the big business sector. And they are planning also to provide funds for construction and big infrastructure tickets in the hope of jump-starting the economy after during the pandemic. So I think there is a space for us to demand, not really to propose, but really to demand that the government include in its stimulus package a package for social enterprises. But we have to, respond to the questions: how much do we think is needed for social enterprises? And which social enterprises are we talking about? And if the government is going to provide stimulus package for social enterprises, how will the government implement it? Which government agency will have to put it in its budget, and to which government agency will the government give the funds? Because in the case of the support for child workers' families, this will be given to the Department of Labor and Employment. So I think these questions are very important when we provide, our demand for support for social enterprise. And I think ICEA is in a good position, AIM, to propose this and to propose a mechanism by which these funds will be used, not only now, but maybe in several years, to help the economy recover, and of course to help the social enterprises also revitalize again. So that's my thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this insight.
Thank you, Thea. Anyone else? Trilok, you can come. You can. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Trilok Chand Vishwas VK. I am National President of Nepal National Dalit Social Welfare Organization from Nepal. Especially our organization working for the Dalit backwarded community, who are the very poorest of the poor people in Nepal, a very below of the poverty line. And we have a lot of pandemic challenges in our country. Those our community people living in the very poor situation, who has no food and even the no marks for the health safety. And the community has such types of problem. And the another hand is the government side. Government who is announced support for those community, but the accessibility is the very rare opportunity to those people community for the access to get the that support from the government or the any others social organization for in this pandemic of the COVID-19. So we have a lot of challenges in this situation in Nepal, and the huge number now increasing in the huge number of the challenging. And we from our those community, we have all 77 district chapters throughout the country, out of the 77 district of the government of the Nepal. So we have a lot of challenging in the children, in the age old age people, senior citizens, and the very poor community, and who has the no food in this situation, who lost their job opportunity and their small enterprises, and some of the the profession, some small enterprises. People has also a lot of challenges who taken the loan from the banks. Also, that they have the no any subsidies from the government side, and they have also the lot of difficulties to settle down and survive in their lives with their family. And the other hand is the people who has no any access for that those getting the opportunity of the support. Also the problem who has the no citizenship, who has migrant and working who has migrant for work to another places, and they have not to citizenship, and they have the problem to take the support. And if the government provide the subsidies or any support for the COVID-19, that times also challenges those our community. So lot of challenging during this period. And that the caste-based discrimination in Nepal is still we have suffered from that during the COVID-19. Also the some of the people discriminated by the caste-based discrimination in the quarantine uh, quarantine house. And the hospital as well. Hospital, some of the, one of the people died without taking care of the hospital nurses and the doctor, and he already passed away in the hospital without any. So a lot of the cases happen in our country, and we are very much serious in this regards, and we are working in the various problem. So very difficult situation. So what I want to connect with you, that this is the World Fair Trade Organization. What is support, and how you could able to support like this situation in the developing country like our Nepal, or our very poorest of the poor community of Nepal. So I would like to know from you what would be our international community, international organization could be support to our community, to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trilok. Are there any?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other inputs, reactions? I guess if there are none for now, I think we will still have time, and I think we encourage everyone to continue to mull over both the presentations and the ideas that were shared, the inputs that were provided today. And I guess continue to encourage you to share additional ideas that may pop into your, that may come between now and when is the next timeline. And you can email this probably to Gomer, no? Okay. And if you'll allow me, I guess it's perhaps time for me to just very briefly provide my, in a sense, not really a summary, but partly summary, partly a way also of trying to frame both Lisa's synthesis and the concerns that and additional ideas that have been raised. Okay, so first, I classified both the synthesis and what has been shared additionally into essentially 5 main categories or a sequence. I think from my point of view, and in a sense, from one looking in, is I think a common theme that I pick up. Of course, the question that I ask is the whole idea of being able to understand and more clearly define first the impact of the pandemic, okay, on social enterprises, right, and on the whole sector, both in terms of the quality of the impact and also the quantity of the impact. I think this is important because, and what has been shared across is, you've shared how it has impacted the poor, but I think if we make this more concrete, both in terms of how exactly it has impacted, and then the extent and the magnitude with which it has impacted both the poor themselves and also the social enterprises, then perhaps it'll provide us with a better way of moving on to the next steps. And then in terms of the impact, my thoughts are that maybe it is helpful because when we talk about impact, we can classify the impact of the pandemic, in my mind, into at least 2 levels, no? Or 2 categories. Because all of the social enterprises work with the poor. The impact of the pandemic on the poor and the target groups themselves. And one way of thinking or classifying the impacts, I categorize it as the impact of the pandemic, obviously on the health of the poor, the impact of the pandemic on their livelihoods, and a cross-cutting theme that comes across also is the impact of the pandemic on the poor's food security. So maybe that's one way of classifying that. What has been the impact on the poor, the primary target groups, along the areas of health, livelihood, and food security? Because this can then further then provide a basis for crafting or categorizing the range of responses that social enterprises have taken, both as part of their enterprise or in addition to what their enterprises are doing. The second impact, I think, that can benefit from a further deepening and also clearer and more, I guess, more graphic discussion is the impact of the pandemic on the social enterprises themselves. And here we may want to classify them into two. The impact of the pandemic on social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders as a special category, and then the impact on the enterprises themselves. Here, we can, the impact on the market, on the profitability, but I think it helps to just define very clearly what the impact has been. And why do I say that? Because this is, to me, I think, an important building block, because we need to find out, we need to be able to define collectively, this is how the pandemic has affected the social enterprise initiatives along the impact. And we can use the SDG as a basis for how the pandemic has impacted the ability to reach the SDG goals. Okay, so that's the first one. Then the second point or answer is then to build on the different range of experiences and a discussion around how then to respond better to not just the pandemic, but also the impact of the pandemic on ability to survive, to even thrive, right, and attain the social, the sustainable development goals. Okay, so the second point is how to better respond to the situation, and again, the learning, etc. These first two points are important because the first two questions have to be answered before we can answer the third question, which is therefore, if we know and are able to define more clearly how do social enterprises, social enterprise networks, social enterprise support institutions respond, right, to the situation, then we will be able to say, if these are the responses needed, or we think these are the responses that are important, then we will be able to justify then the support. Because while several of the discussions and the panelists have shared about the need for alternative financing mechanisms, for a recovery fund, I think we need to be able to clearly define what will the funds be used for. And in my mind, it will need, therefore, a clear definition and articulation of the kinds of support that social enterprises will need so that they can continue to reach their goals first. Then that's how you frame the support, right, needed. And then a fourth point is then moving forward to say, okay, once we have identified the whole range of support needed, right? When I say support, it can be, is it capacity building? But what kind of capacity building? Is it temporary assistance for the poor groups, right? Is it financing, etc.? Then there has to be a discussion now around how to program these support. And finally, after we answer the first four questions, that will provide the basis then for concretely defining the funding support mechanisms. I guess all I'm saying is that while ultimately the resources are important, the basic question of where the resources are going to be used will be very important. And the prior steps of defining the impact, defining how to respond better, defining what support will be needed to enable the appropriate responses, right? And then how to program the responses form the basis for the funding support. And this can be, in my mind, these can be a process or a frame that the five platforms actually can take on. No? My thoughts on the platforms is they represent at least two categories. No, I think two or three platforms. Let me go back to the platforms again. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, actually, health, transformational partnerships in women's economic empowerment, but the focus of the sector is on agriculture value chains, consumption and production, rural revitalization, and technology. The first four, well, I guess what I suggest perhaps is a frame that can be useful for reclassifying or as a guide for the different platforms. Basically, the impact on health, impact of COVID on the agriculture value chain, on consumption, on rural, and then going forward. So I guess that is my take on how perhaps a way of going forward. No? So let me repeat. I think the challenge of working on defining the impact more clearly, both the negative impact and the intended impact, how to respond to it, what support will be needed, how to program this support, and finally, how to fund this support. Yeah. So, so that's it. And I think what, Lisa, you have...
May I just say a little bit something? Yeah, Ron.
Yes.
I guess what the webinar series has done is actually do a rapid appraisal of the impacts of COVID-19 on the poor and social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions that serve them, and provide us insights in terms of an indicative agenda, no, for actually recovery and building back better. So actually the synthesis that I provided tries to build on the strength of the webinar series in terms of giving that rapid appraisal in answer to your questions, Ron, because all of the webinars actually started from evaluating the impact of COVID-19 on the poor as stakeholders and marginalized sectors as stakeholders of the social enterprises and social enterprise resource institutions that are actually many of them convened here. You know? But I agree with you that there's a need for a systematic research. You know? And in this respect, I think two organizations that have shown the way is actually CSIP. They did some survey on the impact of COVID-19 at the onset of the pandemic in Vietnam. And actually, the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia, in cooperation with the Poverty Reduction for Social Entrepreneurship Coalition, is actually undertaking a comprehensive research using survey and using key informant interviews in order to precisely actually respond systematically to the points that were raised by Ron. And we're hoping that this would input into a systematic process as well for developing the responses needed, as well as the support needed for social enterprise recovery and for them to become partners for building back better. All told, I guess, we do not work under perfect conditions. I think by the time that we have the webinar series ended in August, we would have inputs from various rapid appraisals and also from some systematic research that's going on in some countries. And hopefully we can input that into the discussions during the Social Enterprise Advocacy and Leveraging Conference, where we will be launching the platforms. But I'd also like to respond to the points that were raised by Jerome, Emilia, Hario, Marlon, Sisip, Hang, no? and then Lanying in relation to the platforms. Yeah, I think the whole point that is being raised by many of our colleagues is that while it is good for us to actually engage government to support the recovery and building back better of social enterprises, we also need to engage with the private sector and private funds or high net worth individuals, perhaps, in order for us to create startup funds that would help social enterprises recover immediately, even as investments are made, just as the Poverty Reduction to Social Entrepreneurship Coalition, for example, is doing in the Philippines, to engage government to support social enterprises. But at the same time, I think CICIP, to a certain extent, our colleagues in Indonesia, no? From what I've heard from Pak Bambang in the previous discussion, and also what the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship Coalition is doing in the Philippines is engaging government to see, even as social enterprises are not yet recognized as legal entities in our countries, to actually try to see how social enterprises can engage government to assist them in building back better and to assist them recover. And we are getting some responses that are positive from the Department of Trade and Industry, from the Department of Agriculture, for example, in trying to shape ways and means of starting to work together to help the recovery of social enterprises. So with the Department of Agriculture, we actually have a commitment after our dialogue that we would engage them in agricultural value chain development in at least 2 economic subsectors. In the Department of Trade and Industry, we explored the possibility that government can provide a platform, an e-platform, an e-trade fair that would involve social enterprises, and for them to assist in starting to tag social enterprises among the enterprises that they engage. So I think there's a level of openness on the part of governments to also start working with us, because they are also concerned about the recovery of the poor that we serve. So all told, I guess I agree with Ron that we need to do our homework in terms of systematizing our research, but at the same time, the platforms that we have created are actually based on the rapid appraisal that we've done across the region in terms of relevant platforms that are actually useful for the recovery as well as the efforts of social enterprises to build back better. Back to you, Ron. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, but just quickly for everyone, I think we should use both, because what I meant though, and when I say understanding the impact first, is that you're right. The webinars have already provided us with a whole range of discussions around the nature of the impact, and these are anecdotal and qualitative, and there is value in that. And I'm simply suggesting that if we can consolidate that into one whole section to say these have been how the pandemic has impacted the poor at these different areas based on this sharing, and how this has impacted social enterprises in these particular aspects. Then it provides the groundwork for saying, and this has been some of the responses already. And these responses, some can benefit from further strengthening and scaling, right? Mm-hmm. And we can also point out, these are still what the different webinars have pointed out to be gaps that need to be responded to, which will then answer the question of how to better respond. Okay? So I guess that's what I'm suggesting. You know, and if we can use the systematic surveys later, well and fine, because we do understand that's going to take a little bit of time, and we can afford. So yeah, good. Okay, and I think we bring this particular webinar. Well, this is not a webinar, the synthesis workshop, to an end, but only to an end in terms of our time, because I mean, even today, a lot has been shared, and I do encourage you to continue to let your ideas percolate and do send them in. Right? And if you'd like, you may even want to go back to the recordings to listen to the inputs and generate additional insights. But before we do that, can we, Gomer, we should take a group picture, right? So can we have everyone turn on their video? And I think Gomer will be the one to to take the group picture for us? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone, please turn on your video cameras.
We won't fit in the screen, so Gomer, you will do 2 shots, right?
Yes,
Or are
I'll
we-
do the first. I'll do the
Can we-
first. Can we have Mayan, Harimin, Francesca, Santoshi,
Trilok.
Sumrita, Trilok, Sonia, Zone, Aslan? Can you please open your cameras? Smile, everyone. And then another one. Show some teeth. Okay, I guess I got it. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you everyone again for all your inputs and contributions. Gomer, Lisa, last words?
No, thank you very much for a very participatory discussion on the synthesis.
And thank you also for being with us for the past 11 weeks.
Yes, that's true.
We will continue to open some of the platforms, most especially to our to some of our regulars, yeah, as observers. And please do write us if you want to participate in any of the platforms moving forward.
Okay, so congratulations again to Isaiah. Congratulations to everyone. Till our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.